Good evening and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue. My name is Riley Brockington, and I am an Ottawa Library Board trustee and city councillor in River Ward, and I'm very pleased to join you this evening. Kwe, kakina. We believe it is important to acknowledge that even as we gather virtually, we are on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Nous rendrons hommage à toutes les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis, leurs années, leurs ancêtres et leurs importantes contributions passées et présentes. We want to thank our partner in organizing this event, the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Tonight, we welcome the New York Times bestselling author of Elevator Pitch and master of psychological suspense, Linwood Barclay. He's the author of 18 novels and 2 thrillers for children, and his books have been translated into more than 24 languages. He has achieved best-selling success internationally, and his work has and continues to be adopted for film and television. I'm excited to hear him speak tonight about his latest bestseller, Find You First. I'd like to remind you to tune in next Monday as well, May 17th at 8 p.m. when we will welcome Jen Sukfung Lee to discuss her acclaimed debut poetry collection, The Shadow List. Remember, you can always visit the OPL website to find out about upcoming programs and to access the wide range of content and resources that comes with a library card. Have a great evening and good night.
Hello, my name's Lucy Van Oldenbarneveld, and I know for sure that Sean would be telling all of you to buy multiple copies of Linwood Barclay's awesome book. So he doesn't have to say that. Just a little reminder for you. But anyway, I am thrilled to be here. By all means, Sean, just jump in when you get unstuck there. It's a thrill for me to be back at the Writers Festival. It's just one of my favorite festivals and things to do. And the fact that we can continue doing these author interviews, even during a pandemic, is just a real testament to the Ottawa Public Library and the Ottawa Writers Festival. So this is great. As Riley told you, Linwood Barclay is a massively successful Canadian author. A sentence we didn't used to hear a lot. But Linwood has just set a new trend in Canadian authors, one of the most successful living writers. And his books have been translated into more than 40 languages, published in more than 30 countries, and also his massive success has made him a multi-millionaire. And so this is what, no, he's shaking his head. He's shaking his head, and we can talk about that. But nonetheless, he's a crazy success, and we're so proud of him as a Canadian and as mystery lovers. So something for you to know, we will be taking a Q&A, your questions, towards the end of our interview. So you see that little Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen there. Feel free to fire any questions away whenever you like. And you can do it there or on Facebook. And so after I ask Linwood a few questions, then you feel free to do that. So as we mentioned, we are here to talk about Find You First. And Linwood Barclay joins us now from his home in Toronto. Linwood, so great to meet you. Hello.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks very much. Thanks to the Ottawa Public Library and the Writers Fest for having me.
So let's talk about what this book is actually about. We know there's a dying man, possible heirs to a massive fortune, a shady fertility clinic. Maybe his heirs are being killed. Who's responsible? Take us through this story and what happens in this book.
Well, briefly, it's about it's about a tech, very wealthy tech guy in his early 40s by the name of Miles, and Miles has immensely successful, and but he's learned that there's at least one thing that money can't buy, and that's time, because he has learned that he has a terminal illness and has a limited amount of time left. And he's also been told that this is a disease that is in 50% of cases is passed on to the next generation. They say to him, well, it's a good thing you never had kids. What they don't know is that a couple of years, Miles was a sperm donor. He sold sperm to buy his first computer. And And so after a lot of soul searching, Miles thinks, gee, there's these possible, folks out there now grown who may very well have this disease. And maybe I should alert them. But also, what am I going to do with this huge amount of money? Who's it going to go to? And so Miles decides, as I say, after some soul searching, to seek out these potential heirs. And once he begins on this quest, these people start vanishing one by one before he can find them. And they not just disappear, like every trace of them is just disappearing. And so we don't know what's, is one of the other possible heirs taking everybody else off the table so that there'll be more money for them, or is there something more serious going on? And so one of the first people that Miles does meet up with, a young woman named Chloe, who's an aspiring documentarian who has been looking for half siblings that she has. And she and Miles set off on this quest. And as I say, and all the people they go looking for are all vanishing. And that's our, as I call it, elevator pitch for Find You First.
Yeah, and it is an absolute page turner, I have to say. The what you have said in the past about developing plot lines for your stories, you've said the greatest source of anxiety for you is the thought that someone you love might disappear. So how have you over the years channeled that fear into your own storylines and this one as well?
Well, I think, most of I'm riddled with anxieties, which I suppose is a really good thing for a thriller writer. I think I'm a kind of guy, the cup is always half empty for me. And when I started writing thrillers, I thought, well, I don't really identify with your sort of Jack Reacher or James Bond type of characters. I'm much more, tuned into sort of everyday people. And so I think I want to write about everyday people and as they, ordinary people as they encounter extraordinary situations. And I think that most of us, we all have a lot of things that we could be worried about. We could be worried about global warming, and we could be worried about who's got the bomb and so forth. But the things that keep us awake in the middle of the night tend to be, why isn't my daughter home yet? Or am I going to be able to keep my job? Or, what's happening with my sick relative? Are they going to make it through? Are they going to be able to get that operation? I mean, the things that keep us awake in the night are very personal. And so those are the kind of fears and anxieties I like to try to tap into, because I think those are the ones that touch people the most, that they can identify with.
And part one of the, as you touched on there, these heirs of Miles Cookson. Tries to track them down, and we're trying to figure out what's happening to them. But the Shady fertility clinic idea is also one of those anxieties for people. We have had stories here in Ottawa about shady fertility doctors doing awful things. And so that particular anxiety, what made that a compelling storyline for this? What drew you to that?
Well, and that's a tougher question to answer, perhaps without revealing too many spoilers. But and the kind of thing that you're talking about, whether in fact our dear doctor, perhaps at her clinic, is the one who's providing the samples to everybody, and that's a storyline that I've seen and I'm aware of and has happened, and that may or may not be what's happening here. It's what did strike me about doing this book was that it's a thriller that I could not have written 10 or 15 years ago, because we're now living at a time when you can turn on the TV at night and you'll see a commercial where they're saying, hey, send us your saliva sample and we'll tell you everything about you. And if you'd like, we might even be able to connect you to people that you did not know you were related to. And that's a whole new world. And so the sort of premise for this book, or some aspects of it, are something I couldn't have done 10 or 15 years ago. And so I think a lot of the advances that are being made in so many different fronts are presenting not just moral and ethical dilemmas, but they're providing opportunities for writers like myself to come up with plots that are a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. The character of Jeremy Prattkin reminded me of someone in the headlines in the last few years. Just a little bit. What can you tell me about him and why he plays a role in this book?
Well, I can't know if I can tell you again, quite too much why, but
Yes.
we very early on in the story, I mean, we're spending time with Miles and we're spending time with Chloe, this, one of these possible heirs. And then we're going to New York City and we're spending time with this despicable, loathsome, extremely wealthy and well-connected individual by the name of Jeremy Prattkin, who may or may not have a sort of passing resemblance to one Jeffrey Epstein. And so we keep coming back to New York, and we're coming back to this one poor young girl who's essentially a prisoner in this brownstone. And then we're back with Miles, and we think, what on earth do these stories have to do with each other? And I'm hoping for a lot of readers, part of the fun is going to be, so when do these storylines intersect? Why are we spending so much time with this guy? What does he have to do with Miles's quest? And that, I hope, is going to be part of the reason why you're turning the pages.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Linwood, you spent many years working as a journalist and as a columnist, a humor columnist at the Toronto Star.
Yeah.
How much do the headlines influence how you shape your characters and your stories?
Well, some of my books have been sort of inspired by real events. Some have been totally unrelated. And even when you have a storyline that is sort of a real event sparks an interest, by the time you start working on it, it gets completely different. I did a book, my first big hit I had, there was a book from 2008 called No Time for Goodbye. And that was a book that was about a young girl, 14-year-old girl who gets home, and one night, and she's had a lot of trouble with her parents. She's drunk, she goes to bed. When she wakes up in the morning, hungover, the family's gone. Everybody in the house is gone. Her mother, her father, her brother, they're gone. And 14 years go by and she's never known what happened to them. Well, the idea for that was sparked by a very unfortunate story that was in the news about a 14-year-old girl who was abducted from a home in the middle of the night. And I was thinking about that story at 5 a.m, laying in bed. And I thought, what if you turned it upside down? What if everybody was gone except for this 14-year-old girl? And so a lot of times, as I say, real events spark an idea, but then it becomes something totally different. So headlines occasionally do. When I did a book a couple of years ago called Elevator Pitch, which was about a guy who was dispatching his victims by sabotaging elevators throughout Manhattan. And that all came from a very simple news item on CBC radio, which was that in Toronto, where we have all these massive condo towers going up like crazy, looks like Hong Kong, that the city didn't have enough elevator inspectors to keep up with the pace of building. And everything was fine. There hadn't been a problem, but they just didn't have enough inspectors. And when I heard it, the idea was just there. What if you had a guy who was sabotaging elevators? And that became Elevator Pitch, a book which I'm pleased to say did for elevators what Psycho did for showers.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Putting elevators on the map like that.
That's right. We thought, what can we do? How can we make elevators make you feel the way you did about swimming after Jaws? That's the goal.
That's right. That's right. But going back to No Time for Goodbye, your sort of big break book,
Yeah.
there's a great story there in terms of how you had been at the Toronto Star, you'd been writing books on the side, and then all of a sudden, as you say, 5 a.m., you get this. Your agent really wants you to go into a new direction. You give her, I believe it was her, a pitch at 5 a.m. with this. Why was this book so different than what you had been creating? Why was it a big break?
Well, I had written, No Time for Goodbye was actually my 5th novel. I had done 4 what I would call comic thrillers about a character named Zach Walker, 4 books that I'm very proud of, but which at the time collectively had sold about 65 copies. And so my agent said, you know what, you need to, don't write a series and don't write funny. You need to write what she called a big book, a big thriller. And so, so I was coming up with ideas, and I'd send her an idea and she'd say, I've read that before, or that's terrible, or whatever. And so when I had this idea at 5 a.m. about a girl who wakes up and her family's gone, I sent her an email at 8:30, and the phone rang about 5 minutes later, and she said, that's it. That's a great hook for a thriller. And because she's an agent, she's very good with story and plot, and she wants to know everything. She said, what happened to the family? And I said, I had no idea, none at all. And so she said, that's okay, you'll figure that out. And that's that's kind of the way it is with all sort of thrillers for me at first, is that I get an idea of something that's really like a great what if, and then you think, okay, now before I start writing, I have to know what happened. But that idea that came at 5 a.m, I couldn't have known at the time, but that completely changed my life, because that book, we sold it in Germany, and then we sold it in the UK, and then in the summer of 2008, that book got picked by a TV show in England called Richard and Judy, which had an Oprah-like book club. And for whatever reason, No Time for Goodbye became the biggest selling book ever in the history of that TV show's book club, and finished out 2008 as the biggest selling novel of the year in the UK. So, and the question is, what you ask is, why? Why did it click? And I think it's because that book tapped into a kind of primal fear that we all have, and that's to be left behind, to lose all of our loved ones, to lose our family in an instant. And I think that just struck a nerve. And so people could imagine having that sort of a horrible thing happen to them, and seeing that it happened in this book to this girl. They thought, well, then what did happen? They wanted to know. And so that book allowed me to, at that point, to just write books full time. I gave up the day job at the Toronto Star, which was a very difficult decision because I had a dental plan. Who quits a job with a dental plan? You know what I mean? And my wife and I would go for long walks. She'd say, I think I can get us a dental plan. And so that's the rest is history.
And the rest is history. And how did that book then change? I mean, and your wife getting the dental plan, plus
Yeah.
the book doing okay, and then just extra flossing so that there were no trouble. There's no
Absolutely.
trouble.
Absolutely.
How did that change the trajectory of what you then started writing about?
Well, I mean, the thing was that, a lot, and of course, in the UK, where the previous 4 sort of conflicts had never come out, everybody thought, well, that's his first novel. And when a lot of people have a first novel and it's a massive hit, there's this kind of immense anxiety about trying to write a book that follows it up. And in fact, I had written the next novel before No Time for Goodbye became a hit. So I kind of got over that fear of doing the book that's after a hit. But what No Time for Goodbye really did for me was, it was like getting launched out of a cannon, because having become a huge hit in the UK, well, then it's like, well, publishers in France said, maybe we should get that book and get it translated. And that book became a huge bestseller in France. So we ended up, that book sold, as I say, all over the world in umpteen languages. And so then it was kind of, okay, I'm up and running. And so every book I have done since, and in fact, there's this Find You First is in fact my 20th novel now. And every book since has, we've done very well with them. And it's just, that was the momentum that really kind of got me going.
Yeah, and you say it's the 20th. I mean, you've been cranking out a book every year, sometimes 2.
Sometimes 2.
How are you so prolific? Like, tell us the secret.
Well, contracts are very motivating. You sign a contract with a publisher and they want a book a year, and you think, well, that's motivating, because if you don't write it, then you have to give them a whole bunch of money back. And so that's the first motivation. And those of us who are writing crime fiction, thrillers, there is a kind of expectation that you'll do one a year. And so, every year, or there's the new Michael Connelly or 2, and every year there's the new Jack Reacher novel by Lee Child. There's a new David Baldacci. So those of us who are doing this kind of fiction, every year there's a new Louise Penny, so there is a kind of expectation that there'll be a book a year. There are a couple of exceptions. I mean, I had a lovely event talking to Robert Crace a few weeks ago, who writes the Aldous Cole novels, and he's kind of not stayed on that treadmill. He does one about every year and a half or so. But the rest of us are kind of, they want to see that annual book. Lee Child talks about how he writes a book for that guy who buys one book a year and takes it to the beach in the summer. And although you can take mine anywhere you'd like, that's fine. You have to go to the beach. So that's kind of an, and to sort of get to your question again, I think what really helps one be able to do that is having spent 20, 30 years in newspapers, where you are expected to produce every day. And when you've had that kind of a background, you realize that writing is a job, and you sit down and you just get to work.
can you just talk us through that? What do your walls look like? Are you plotting things out? Is there a big chart up there? Like,
No,
talk
you
us
can
through.
see there's Batman art over there. There's no
Oh
chart over there. There's just a whole bunch of books over here, and there's some posters up here and so forth. You can sort of see the whole room.
yeah. Okay.
Over up here, there's a really cool model of the flying sub from Voice to the Bottom of the Sea. So there's a lot of toys, and there's an old-fashioned typewriter there for looks. So no, so I don't, so you got the tour there. So I don't, and these books just happen to be arranged this week totally by accident.
It's a crazy coincidence. Yeah.
I don't know. I just looked and went, wow, that's curious. So once I have an idea, I don't storyboard it. I don't, have post-it notes all over the place. I will, when I'm starting a novel, make about 10, 20 scribbles notes in a notebook, just sort of writing down character names and how I think it's going to work and how I think it's going to come together. And then when I have an idea, if I think it's getting bright in here, the sun has come through the clouds and I'm just attacked from sunshine, but it'll pass soon. It's going to. So once I have that sense of what the whole story is, when I know where I'm starting, I know where I'm going to end up. I just figure, you know what, I'm going to start writing. And so usually, and the thing is, right now, I mean, I don't have to start writing another novel till about October or so. It's probably when I'll start writing another book from scratch. But right now I'm sort of mulling over 3 or 4 ideas, like which one might it be? And I'll just, when I finally latch onto one that I like, I'll kind of think about it while I'm sitting on the deck or something.
Yeah.
But then when I decide, no, it's time to get to work, I'll just start making those notes for maybe a week or two, and then I'll start writing.
Does it surprise you yourself just how organized and dedicated you are to getting this stuff done? For those of us who are procrastinators, I am in awe right now.
Well, no, and I think that still goes back to the newspaper question.
Yeah.
When I was first of all, I spent 12, 13 years at the Toronto Star as an editor, working on the daily paper on any number of capacities. And then I started doing 3 columns a week. And when you're doing 3 columns a week, you don't really have any option but to be organized. And so if you decide one day to call the editor and the managing editor and say, the muse just didn't strike me today, so I don't think I'll do a column, you wouldn't be there for very long. So that kind of regimen, I think, is really great background for doing a book. So when I'm in the thick of writing a novel, my goal is like, I want to get 2,000 words done today. And if I can do that, some days I do a little less, some days I might do more, but if I can maintain that as a kind of average, that's 10,000 words in a week, and in 2.5 months or so, you have a first draft. And that's kind of how I work. And then depending on how good that first draft is, will determine how many more weeks I spend with it in rewriting and so forth. Like I've just finished writing a second draft. I wrote the novel that will come out in 2022. I wrote from September to Christmas and delivered to my publishers in January. And then about 6 weeks ago, my editors gave me notes, what they thought the book needed. And I spent better to 2.5, 3 weeks doing a second draft and sent that off. So I just think that nothing teaches you. I mean, I'm sure it's very true for you working in the environment that you work in, is that you don't have the luxury of just sitting around and just sort of twiddling your thumbs, wondering what you're going to do. You just have to get to work.
Yeah. And along those notes, I have a question. Some of the questions are just streaming in here. A question from Justin along those lines. What kinds of edits do you find the most difficult to make when you receive feedback from your publisher?
Well, the worst are, first of all, I have to say that when you finish writing a first draft and you send it to your publisher, I always think that's kind of like waiting to get tests back from the doctor's office. How bad is it going to be? And a lot of times you're so close to working on a project, you don't know. And so the worst is when, when I got the notes back on this particular book, they felt there was, say, one character that wasn't working quite right. And there were other things, but that was the big one. And I thought, well, that's pretty manageable. I can I can rework that character and so forth and so on. What was really hard is when I did a book a few years ago called A Tap on the Window, that particular novel, the feeling was that the sort of underlying foundation, the thing that everything was built on, didn't work. And so that's the worst. That is kind of when you're getting back into a book, if everything that sort of is the bottom sort of structure, like what is it that happened that drives all the action? If they feel that part's not working, that's a huge rewrite. And that book was a huge rewrite. I mean, everything that was sort of driving the action had to change. A lot of the things that happened because of that, I was able to keep the same, but that was a massive rewrite. So it's, character, dialogue, things like that, that's really easy to fix. But if it's the whole substructure of the whole book, that's like, I mean, I did one, this was great, I'll tell this quickly. About 13 years ago, when just after I'd had this big hit, I wrote a novel that was, my book that I would write for that year under contract, and I gave it to my agent, and she read it and she thought, wow, when I was writing it, I heard this voice in the back of my head that was saying, there's problems here, but you can fix them later. And then I got to the very end, and it became obvious that I really wasn't sure I could fix them, that the book was sort of structurally flawed from the get-go. And my agent, who knows I work quickly, said, you could write another book from scratch in less time than it would take to fix everything that's not working in this book. And so I just set it aside and I did another one. I just thought, I think they're right. I don't think this book works. And so in a sort of mad panic, and I thought about stepping in front of a bus for a couple of days. Then when I didn't do that, I just started writing another book. And I'd had this other idea in my head. And that book I wrote in 7 weeks because I was behind the 8 ball, as it were. And but I don't feel bad about that because it was a good lesson. When you hear that voice in the back of your head that says, this ain't working, stop.
What a machine, 7 weeks. Okay, this question here from Andy Linwood. Is it easier or harder to write a book a year when you don't have a continuing character to rely on, like Cray or Conley do?
Well, there's plus and minuses to that. I think that it is kind of nice if you have a continuing character, because it's sort of half of your work is done before you begin. You've got your place, you've got your characters, everybody knows them. You don't have to set it up. You just have to decide what happens to them this time. But when you do standalones, and that's mostly what I do now, you're really starting from ground zero. You've got everything to figure out, characters, locate everything. But the luxury of that is you can do anything you want. With a series, you're restricted. You can't kill off your hero. You need him for the next book, and you can't kill off his friends. And you can't do this. You can't, he's not going to do anything so radical that you're going to think, well, I won't read him again. So it's great that you have this opportunity to just get back with these old friends and write another book, but you're limited in what you can do. Whereas with a standalone, you just do anything to these people, which I have.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, just pros and cons to both sides. Linwood, when did you first know that you wanted to be a writer, that you were passionate about this?
I don't know, probably around grade 5 or 6. I was in around probably really grade 6 was around that time was when it was really, I would have been 11, I guess. And I would really love to tell you that my motivation for writing was the works of Dickens and Hemingway, but it was television. I just love television. And I would watch my favorite shows that I had, like Mission Impossible or The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or whatever it was, or Columbo when it went a little later. And I think, an episode a week's not enough for me. I need another one. So I would write what we today call fan fiction. And when I was 11 or 12, when I was 11, I got my dad to teach me how to type. I got a typing lesson because I could crank out these things faster. And I would write 30, 40 page novellas based on my favorite TV show. And so, and that's kind of when it started. And so I was right on through. That's why I was writing like crazy. When I was 15, 16, all I thought I would want to do would be to be a writer for television, although there was a rather limited demand for that growing up in Fenelon Falls, Ontario, at the time. But that's what I thought I wanted to do. And then once I sort of was in university and I started writing novels in my late teens and early 20s, I figured what I would do as soon as I got out of university is I would just be a best-selling novelist. And I was sending these novels out to all these publishers, and they were sending them back so quickly they would almost be back home before I got home from the post office. They would be there with a rejection letter, and none of those novels were published. And as I've often said, we can all be grateful for that, be more than anyone. And that's why I went into newspapers. So I thought, well, where can you get paid money to write every day? And so I got my first newspaper job at the age of 22 at the Peterborough Examiner.
Wow. Okay. And I want to go back to Peterborough in just a second, but tell me what all those rejection letters did to you. Like, why did you think you could ever be a best-selling author when you were getting all these rejection letters?
Well, I knew even then that that's kind of the way the business worked, that you got a lot of rejection. And I was fortunate enough to have, even at that age, at a young age, I had a couple of mentors who were very successful professional authors. And one of whom was the iconic Canadian literary writer, Margaret Lawrence, who was a good friend. And I met her when she was a writer in residence at Trent. And the other was Ross MacDonald, who wrote the Lou Archer novels, whose real name was Kenneth Miller. And the fact that they both had taken an interest in me and read my stuff and were very encouraging, I think told me that even if I wasn't good enough yet, maybe one day I would be. And I read enough and knew enough that rejection was kind of the way it went. And so I still have them somewhere. I've got an envelope just stacked with all these form letters. I always I love the always way they phrased it, was that they were turning the manuscript because it did not meet their current needs. But it was sort of like, when we need a novel that's terrible, we will be in touch. But right now, we've got all the terrible novels we could handle. So we'll get back to you.
And can you just tell us the story of Kenneth Miller? I believe he was the one who wrote an inscription he signed a book of his for you. And what did it say?
Well, let me just see if I can find it. It's
Yes.
right here. It's this, I believe it's this one. Let me just check. Here we go. So my favorite writer in the world, and still my favorite, but when I was like starting at the age of 15, was Ross MacDonald, whose real name was Kenneth Miller. And he wrote the Lou Archer series of mystery novels. He was born in the US, but actually grew up in Ontario. And then eventually moved, he was actually taught in Kitchener. June Colwood was one of his students way back when. But he's really associated with California. And I discovered his novels from the twirling, squeaky metal paperback rack at the IGA in Bodcajun. And that's why I was there to buy the band of paperbacks. So anyway, I had a long correspondence with him, and I did this horrible thing where I asked if I could send him the book I'd written, and I realized now what a huge imposition that was, and he said, sure. So anyway, at one point, he and his wife, the noted crime writer Margaret Miller, were going to be in Peterborough, and he invited me to have dinner with him. But anyway, he wrote in the front of this book, he wrote, Peterborough, Ontario, May 1st, 1976, for Linwood, who will, I hope, someday outright me. Sincerely, Kenneth Miller, bracket, Ross MacDonald. So
Wow.
when the house burns down, it's the first thing I grab.
Wow. Now, unfortunately, he did not live long enough to see your success, right?
No, well, he very sadly, he passed away, I think it was in 1980. I'll get this wrong. I want to say 83. But he had Alzheimer's, and it's funny that I think there were hints, but the evening I spent with him, which was really a treasure, it was just one of the most amazing evenings of my entire life to hang out with him. And at one point he was very confused, like he couldn't find his way out of this house. He was opening closet doors and so forth, and I thought something was off. And having read a lot about him since, and including, talking to his biographer and so forth, that was the very beginning of it. And he only wrote one, I think he wrote one more novel after this. He wrote The Blue Hammer, and he didn't do any books after that because he couldn't keep the plot straight. And his plots were quite Byzantine. So, and I'm told, I don't think I've spotted it, that there's a plot error in The Blue Hammer. There's a mistake. And he would have had to live a lot longer to see my success, but it's very sad that he didn't live longer.
Oh, what a treasure that is, though, Linwood. I'm going to take a couple more questions here. We're getting tons. Okay, from Jennifer. She asks, what books do you read on your vacation?
Well, I'm reading stuff all the time, but usually if there's it's funny. I have so many writers whose work I really love, and if there's one that's just immensely thick, like if it's really long or it's a lot, it's quite demanding or requires a real attention, I might save that for when we're going off, to our other place and sitting on the deck or whatever. I'll save that. Like I'm a big fan, for example, of James Lee Burke's novels, particularly those about Dave Robichaux, the cop. And he's a writer that you can't skim. Like every sentence is worth savoring. And so that's a book that something like that is something that I will save for when I can just sit down and really enjoy it.
Hmm. Okay, let's see now. Steve has this question. Love your work and just got my copy of Find You First. Wondering if your writing process has changed as you have become more successful. Does it free you to try new things, or do you feel you need to try to give the reader what they want or what they think they want? Thanks for doing this, Steve.
That's a good question. You have to kind of strike a balance. You want to, if you have someone who's a fan of your books, you want to give them what they really like and what they've gotten in the other books, but you don't want to give them the same story they had before either. So you want to give them something that has the elements that they are familiar with and love, but want to give them a new story. You don't want them to read it and think, well, this is just like that one he did 2 years ago. So there's that. And it's funny when you do something that's a little different, it can sometimes throw your publishers, like not make them wonder what to do. Because a couple of years ago, I wrote a thriller that I would call more of a Michael Crichton kind of a thriller. And it's finally going to come out next year. We're not even sure if it'll be just an ebook or a paperback original one, but it's not like my usual book. So they didn't want it to be the one book of the year that comes out. So when you do something that's different, so because this is just as it was said, there's a certain expectation when you pick up a new lead child novel or whatever, you know what you're getting, you're getting what you really want. So it really is kind of is walking a tightrope. I want to give you what you're expecting, but I don't want to give you something exactly what you got before.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Suzanne says she really misses the neurotic Zach Walker. Any chance he's going to make a return?
I think it's highly unlikely. I wrote 4 novels about Zach that came out between 2004 and 2007. So, I mean, I haven't actually written a novel about Zach since 2006. So that's 15 years since I've written Zach. And so, and I don't think my publishers, even like I say, at the time that the Zach books came out, they were not big hits. What's nice is that as the new books have been successful and drawn an audience, people have looked for the early ones and they have found them, and so they've liked the Zach books. And Zach was a great character because he was this kind of well-intentioned pain in the butt, and I hate to tell you who he's based on, but I kind of channeled all my anxieties into that character. He's kind of me unchecked. And they were really fun books to write, but I think his return is unlikely. I wouldn't say never. I mean, every once in a while, some producer somewhere says, we think this Zach would make a great TV series. And so I think, okay. And then nothing happens. But, if that were someday to happen and there was a new interest, I think, well, maybe. It's funny, in the 4th Zach book, because Zach was kind of, as I say, a bit of a pain. I was going to have his wife leave him in book 4. And then book 5 would be Zach winning her back, rescuing her for some, I don't know, whatever. And I realized I was writing book 4. I thought, I don't think I'm probably going to do another one of these. So I thought, I can't end a series that way. I can't do that. So they stayed together, but I'm sure that she's never forgiven me.
We'll end on a couple of more questions about Find You first, Linwood, but I wanted to ask, as a Margaret Lawrence fan, when you were studying English Lit at Trent, do you have any stories you can tell? What more can you tell us about Margaret Lawrence?
Gosh, well, first of all, Margaret always struck us, and my wife Nitha, as kind of larger than life. She was, I went to see, she was a writer in residence, and I think all I had ever read of hers was one short story in high school. But I thought, well, here's someone who makes a living as a writer. I want to go see her and take her stuff I've written. And so I went and had meetings with her. She was there at the second semester 1 year, and then she came back in the fall. So she spanned those 2 periods. So over that summer, I thought, well, I felt kind of guilty that she was reading my stuff, and I hadn't even read her. So I read all of her novels over that summer. And she must have thought I was the biggest jerk ever, because when I came back in the fall, I said to her, you know, I felt bad you were reading everything of mine. I hadn't read yours. So I read them all over the summer, and they're pretty good. And I mean, what a jerk, you know what I mean? But she was great. And she became a really good friend. What was interesting was I would go up, once she was no longer at Trent, and she was living in Lakefield. And then, of course, then I had met and was getting married to Nitha, and then we'd see her more often because everybody loves Nitha more than me. And so, you know, Nitha and Margaret would have hit it off. But anytime I went up to see her, I would always go up with a stash of like paperback crime novels, Ross MacDonald novels, Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe novels, all that sort of stuff. And she just loved that stuff. I mean, I'd come up with a stack and she'd go, oh, yes, you know. And so we have this image that she's this Canadian literary writer, and she was, but she just loved to be entertained. And so I always went up there with, I think she would call it her stash, you know, all these. And when I got a job at the Peterborough Examiner, and if I had some big story on page 1, like some big fire or something, and there'd be my byline and a picture, but the phone would ring that night, and it would be her, and she'd say, wow, kiddo, that was awesome. You know, that was great. And, but she was really wonderful, and she was encouraging, and she was full of advice, and she was a great person.
What a connection. I mean, that's incredible. So Linwood, just to go back to your book, can we convince you to maybe read a small section from it, set it up for us?
Well, yes, I had said when we were emailing today, I had said this, you know, for everyone else's benefit, I'm not a big fan of doing readings, because I think listening to authors read is, when I listen to other authors read, sometimes I just lose the will to live. And I just think it's so boring. And my experience is that at literary festivals, most people know how to read anyway. So why do you have to read to them? So when I do readings, I tend to do rather short ones. So I thought, well, this is there's a prologue, but then there's chapter 1. And I thought I would read from the beginning of chapter 1, which is datelined New Haven, Connecticut. And it begins, "You're dying." So that's that. I just didn't want to go on too long.
Okay. All right.
Forgive me if I kind of went on a bit there. But I just thought that was enough.
That's enough, eh? Okay, thanks. We'll pick it up and figure out the rest then ourselves.
Okay.
This question from Mary. She asks, why do you set your books in the US rather than Canada?
Well, first of all, if I had people doing things that were this evil and terrible, nobody would believe that they were Canadian. And someone asked me the other day, is there anything different in the Canadian editions than the US editions? And I said, yes, when the killer kills somebody, he says sorry. But when I started doing this, and this is a true story. So when I started writing crime fiction at the beginning, like I have a spectacular Canadian publisher, so, you know, distributor and all kind of stuff. But when I started doing this, I could not get a Canadian publisher. So books were being sent to Canadian publishers. I was writing crime fiction. I was writing the funny series of Zach novels and so forth. Nobody was interested. And so but then we sent the books to Bantam Publishing in the US, and they bought them. And it was a bit of a case of you dance with the one what brung you. I couldn't get a Canadian publisher until book 7. So,
Wow.
And I'm not, you know, like I say, I'm very pleased with everything that all like the folks in Canada, but you know, Canada has a very strong tradition of sort of literary fiction, which is great. It deserves it. But when it comes to crime fiction, it's kind of like, oh, well, you know. So I had to sell like 1 million books in the UK, and then I got a Canadian publisher.
Why do you think that is? What's going on?
I don't know. Well, I don't know. I think it's changing. I mean, because there's a lot of spectacular Canadian crime writers. There's Louise Penny, there's Peter Robinson, there's Rick Messina. There's a lot of us out there doing that, and we're and getting noticed. And I think that the situation has evolved and has changed. But I'm writing. I guess that's my answer. When I started doing all of this, I got a US publisher, and I couldn't get one up here. But it's still true that Canadians are too nice to do these things.
Yeah, exactly. No one would believe it, as you say. Okay, here's a question from Courtney, perhaps the most prescient question of the evening. Hey, Linwood, you're my favorite author, so huge fan here, off topic, but how is the street work coming? Are they still working on your street?
We're
I've been following the journey.
We're making some real, I've been tweeting about the progress. They've been redoing the water mains on our street and ripping it all up for like 7 months. And what they do is they come, along the whole street, but right in front of our place, they will dig an immense hole in the street, do something down there, and then fill it all in and be done. And then 2 weeks later, they will come back to the same place and they will dig it all up, and they will dig a big hole in the same plot and do something else. My theory is that one of the workers has lost his car keys and they just not sure where they are. So they keep ripping up different parts of the street all the time. And so, and this week, but I see a glimmer of hope. Oh, actually, this was great. In early February, big, huge hole in the front. And they somehow, with the construction permit, nicked the existing water main. And there was this like 30-40 foot geyser going up into the sky, thankfully not towards our house. This massive, there's a knock at the door, and I open up, there's a worker there with the orange hat, and he says, and there's this water, it's like Niagara Falls in reverse going up behind him. And I said, that doesn't look good. And he said, yeah, we're gonna have to turn the water off for a bit. And I said, if I need water, can I just go outside with a bucket and hold it upside down over that? And but I see progress. This week, they are putting in, and they were doing it right in front of our place today, brand new sidewalks. So which signals the nearing the completion, because they're not going to rip up into the yards anymore if they're putting in the new sidewalks. So they say that this might be done in July. A friend of mine, a writer in England, sent me a note. He said, are you going to kill any construction workers in your next book? And I said, all of them. I'm going to get them all.
Oh, Courtney, thank you for that question. That was great. We'll look for the construction workers.
But yesterday morning, they were tearing up the old sidewalks, and in the whole house, we were downstairs having breakfast. It was like sitting on a dryer. We were sort of like this through the whole house. And at the end of the day, my wife goes around and straightens every picture in the house. And it's really terrific when they do that. And I think I have 3 Zoom calls before noon, and the whole house sounds like it's going to be torn apart.
Oh my God, Linwood, look at how excited you are to talk about the street work. This is a great topic.
It's been just amazing. It's just amazing.
This question from Michelle: in your downtime, is it red or white wine or whiskey? And is it a beach somewhere or an old village in the Cotswolds?
Well, first of all, we don't have to wait for downtime for the white wine, or usually I know when it's time to stop working, but I usually start writing around 8 o'clock. And if I can get those 2,000 words done, usually I stop around 2:30. But it's like there's a whistle blows, because around 2:30, there's my wife from downstairs will call up and say it's vodka o'clock. And so then it's like, yeah, I better stop. So, but no Cotswolds. We have a place in Prince Edward County that we got a few years ago, and then we like to get up there and just sit on the deck and watch boats go by and so forth. Beautiful. And books and a drink and chips, and it's wonderful.
A couple more questions, Linwood. We're quickly running out of time here. So as a TV fan, this one is from Facebook. As a TV fan, what is your go-to series to watch these days?
Well, we just finished, and of course, there's been a lot of binge watching since March of last year. And that's usually, I'm the entertainment director. My wife will say, what are we going to watch tonight? And I tell her one day, I said, we've seen every series ever made. It's everything. And so I have to try to find something. So we got lucky. Our son, who's, our grown son who lives, in another part of the city, he had been recommending a show that he watched when it came out that we never bothered with. It was the sci-fi J.J. Abrams thing called Fringe. And we thought, well, we got a lot of time on our hands and there are 100 episodes. Maybe we should give this a whirl. It was great. So we watched all of that over about, I don't know, 6-7 weeks. So that was pretty amazing. And now I have to find something else. I'm going to check out this Mayor of Easttown from HBO. Looks kind of interesting.
Kate Winslet, supposed to be
Yeah,
great.
it looks really good. There's been a lot of really good stuff. Like that Perry Mason, that rebooted Perry Mason was really good. The Stephen King thing, The Outsider, was great. There's Ted Lasso's coming back in July. That'll be great. That first season was wonderful. And so there's a lot of stuff. But I find that we're very impatient. If a show doesn't grab us in like the first 10 minutes in the first episode, we're gone.
Well, we become spoiled because there really are so many great shows.
I think it's a gold, and as a writer, that's a real challenge, is what can you write that will get people to turn off their TV? Because you can consume television now the way you would consume a book, chapter after chapter. It's right there. You just go for it. And so it's like, well, what can we write that will get you to just stop turning off that TV or stop looking at your stupid phone long enough to read a book? And so that's the competition. And it's funny, I was at a big writers conference a couple of years ago, and all these writers were all sitting around and we're all talking about, what are you watching? What are you watching? And then we realized nobody was saying, what are you reading? So it was like, oh man, and we're writers. So, but I think we're in I think some of the best television that's ever been made is being made now. People who say, oh, television is just junk. Well, some of it is, but a lot of it's not.
No.
And it's amazing.
Absolutely. Linwood, maybe we can end on this question. How does this particular book tour compare to others that you've been on? What do you like about it? What don't you like as much about it?
Well, I haven't missed one flight. There have been no delays. All the appointments and coming upstairs have been on time. I haven't had to eat any airplane food, but I really miss meeting readers. I miss meeting people. When writing is a pretty isolating occupation, and so when you finally have a book tour, you get out there, you see people face to face and talk to them, and you get to sign their books in person, and that's really one of the joys of this line of work. So I miss that. I mean, it's definitely miss that. I mean, I don't miss the flights. I don't miss some of the travel, because book tours can be pretty grueling, particularly US ones where you fly long distance every day and you're up at 5 to go to the airport. So, but it's the meeting people, and I miss that for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it wasn't for this pandemic, if we would have gotten a chance to speak to you, if your schedule would have allowed you to come to Ottawa. So
yeah, I ought to come. I'd have been there.
Well, it's a bonus for us. We really appreciate it. What a great pleasure it's been to talk to you. Thank you so much. This book right here, Find You First. Everyone should buy multiple copies. And
yes, if you want to read it a second time, you should buy 2 copies. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Linwood, what a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lucy. It's been a real pleasure.
All righty. Bye-bye. Take care.